everybody. Have an excellent lunch, and we'll see you back here at 12:30. Thank you so much. All right. Go ahead, Justin or Tyler, whoever wants to jump in on the herd share amendment piece, and then we'll get into the other details.
You want to start, Justin, or you want me to, bud?
Go for it, sir.
Okay. So the herd shares, this is going to be the finest line we walk today, Justin and Stephanie. Hope you're ready to walk a razor. And the reason why that is just like the Wyoming Food Freedom Act or any food rules, is most of this was written over 50 years ago. And that's what we're trying to live with in a world where modern refrigeration was a wonder back then, when a lot of these rules and regulations were written. And a lot of those rules are still around. So when it comes down to meat, I've been working for 6 years trying to figure out how to get meat in the Food Freedom Act. And I don't know that this is the final solution by any stretch of the imagination, but I think this is the most that we can possibly do, or at least I think we've done a lot more than any other state in this regard. And what this comes down to is where herd shares comes from. It comes from the Federal Meat Inspection Act itself. We talk about, last session, we talked about ambiguity and how in times like this, it is a feature. It is not a problem. And so in this regard, what I'm specifically talking about is the Federal Meat Inspection Act under Section 623 is where the custom exemptions come from towards meat inspection. Anything sold retail across state lines has to go through a USDA inspected facility. Anything sold retail within a state, if a state has primacy, and only if they've got primacy and they have a state inspection program that has been approved by the USDA, it can be sold retail within the state. Anything else is considered custom exempt or custom slaughter, and that custom slaughter means that you have to own the animal before it was slaughtered, before you can enjoy that meat from that animal. And in past, we as ranchers and farmers and whatnot have always taken under consideration quarters and halves and eighths and all of those things, where you can buy an eighth or a quarter or a half of a beef before it's slaughtered, share it with some friends, and then you can get it slaughtered at a custom process facility. And custom process facilities, why would you want to process there versus USDA or state inspected? The reality is all those facilities are wonderful and great. It's just there's not a hell of a lot of them. There's not. There's a lot of custom process facilities, but there's not a lot of state inspected or USDA inspected. So when we drill down on this and we talk about those quarters and eighths and halves, this is where it really gets pretty interesting. Under Section 623 of the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the exemptions, there is no statement in regards to ownership. It just says you have to own the animal before it's slaughtered. So we apply that with the existing rules that we've lived under, where you can do a quarter or an eighth or a half or whatever. But where herd shares comes from is why should a share in an animal equate to a certain amount of meat? Why couldn't you sell 10,000 shares on an animal? That would provide access to that animal. I'm specifically not going to say selling meat. Don't worry, WDA. But that is proving ownership before slaughter. So you could have an entire herd of animals, right? Say you've got 30 head of steers, and you can add and subtract from that herd at any time you want, as long as you've got shares sold on those animals when they go to slaughter. Before they're slaughtered, as long as you're proving ownership before they're slaughtered, those people have access to that product of that animal that they owned before they were slaughtered. And so it is the reason why this is so crazy and it is outside of the box is because Federal Meat Inspection Act is very limiting in regards to what you can do to get that local beef. I mean, the reality is we all live in Wyoming, which is all considered rural, right? Even if you live downtown Cheyenne, you're considered rural. You are. By federal standards, you're considered rural. And the reality is every one of these little towns, even the big towns, all have beef standing on the hoof within a mile of town. But most of those restaurants and grocers in those towns, you can't buy local beef, even though it's standing right out there. And so how do we get that access? And that's That's what really drove me to come up with something just as crazy as the herd share agreement or animal shares. And so, and I guess to compound on that a little bit more, if you think about it, or if you drill down on it, is who can afford a quarter or an eighth or even a full steer? If we were just to look at the Federal Meat Inspection Act as it was originally intended, who can afford that? Median wage people, medium class of wage people. Lower income class can't. Think about the single mom that's got 2 kids. She doesn't even have room, most likely, to put a half a beef away or a quarter of a beef. That's if she can save up to earn it. So what we've got is we've got this regulatory system that has essentially shoved the lower working class to purchasing the most expensive, less transparent beef they possibly can by going directly to the big grocers. And I'm not saying those guys are bad guys. They fulfill a role in our society, and they do have good products. But that's where we're forcing our lower working class because they can't find a niche in existing rules under the Federal Meat Inspection Act. So what this herd shares allows for them to do is be able to purchase a share of a herd or an animal specifically and be able to enjoy those benefits of that product.
Tyler,
But like I
can you
oh, go
clarify?
ahead.
I get the idea of like purchasing a side of cow or an eighth or a whatever portion of a cow before. What is it about the new herd share amendment that's then increasing access? Is it making it more explicit how you can buy those portions, or what that transaction maybe looks like? And I know this is a fine line, but can you just clarify what that means for an average consumer?
Sure. And there's going to be a lot of things that I can say, and hopefully won't get us in trouble. I've only been threatened by the USDA 3 times, whereas I'm guessing WDA gets it on a weekly. But yeah, so what this does, and I think it's arguable, Justin or Stephanie, you can agree or disagree or say nothing if you want, but I think it's arguable that the herd share agreement or animal shares technically isn't even needed. I think under the interpretation of the federal law, you could do this right now. Now, the reason why I did it and specifically ran the bill is to give people that idea because nobody was doing it. So when we're talking about an eighth or a quarter or a half, that's typically how things have been sold. But why should your share in an animal equate to so much amount of meat? Now, granted, if you want to buy a whole half of beef or a quarter or whatever, that's between you and your producer. As long as you purchase it before it was slaughtered, then you meet the Federal Meat Inspection Act. With herd shares, you could sell, a rancher or a farmer could sell 10,000 shares on an entire herd of cattle, and as they're being slaughtered, that is proving that those animals were owned by that person, the shareholder, before slaughter, and it doesn't equate to a certain amount of meat. Essentially, at that time, that rancher, and this is where WDA is going to flinch on me a little bit, essentially at that time, the rancher could be getting animals butchered over at a custom slaughter facility from his herd share program, putting them in his freezer at his ranch, and people, the herd share owners, could come by and pick up as little or as much of that beef as they want.
Okay. So this is helping explain some of the nuance of that idea of it doesn't have to be a whole side of beef. It could be interpreted maybe more loosely than that. Stephanie and Tyler, do you want to chime in any? And we acknowledge the razor's edge that Tyler spoke of early. Do you want to add anything else to help people understand specifically around the herd share amendment?
So yeah, and I'll touch base on this. I agree. It's a razor's edge for WDA, and as Tyler mentioned, WDA, our authority for the meat program that we have here in the state of Wyoming is a delegated authority. So we have annual oversight by USDA. So we do an annual self-assessment. We do quarterly responses to where we're verifying that our state-run meat program is equal to the status of the USDA state-run meat program. I'm sorry, the federal program. And so we in turn have a on-site review, and that's scheduled for every 3 years. And where this really becomes a fine line for us, and you may hear me not willing to comment on this, is we have been notified by USDA at this point that Wyoming will be targeted for a review. This targeted review is going to take place in January. And they're coming out specifically to target our meat program because they do not like this bill whatsoever. A couple points that they're making is, you know, in the Food Freedom Act, it says ownership of each animal is established prior to slaughter, and the slaughter is conducted pursuant to 1123-102A. So that's one area that they're going to look at, and they're coming out to review all of our records to ensure that ownership of that animal is, and of each animal in particular, is actually changing hands or taking place prior to the slaughter of that animal. So it is challenging for us. If they designate our program, all those licensed establishments that we do have in the state, we're fearful of what may happen. As we've seen in the history, if they do designate it and they remove our program, those establishments have no choice but then to be regulated by USDA. And sometimes that can take upwards of a year. So we are walking a fine line today. I will speak to it the best I can and try not to put myself in jeopardy, knowing that this will be recorded and it'll be out there for public.
Yeah.
You know, and they are coming on site to target us based on this bill specifically.
So Justin, let me help clarify this. It sounds like the USDA is not happy with the Wyoming interpretation of things. We've heard Tyler's stance on it and how it really should be fine even with federal regulations, but that the USDA folks are not as convinced of that interpretation. And with that is they are coming to provide, or in the regular way that they provide oversight for state inspections, to kind of check that you all are dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And if they find that you are out of compliance, not playing by the rules as they interpret them, the consequences could be kind of removal of that authority for the state certifications. Is that right?
That's correct. So we're really just kind of waiting to see kind of where the chips fall and everything gets interpreted.
Yeah.
You know, we've given USDA our interpretation, our director has provided that response, and whether they agree with it or not, we're just going to have to wait and see. It's not even in my position to determine how this is going to lay out. Sure. I just have to go through the process of conducting on-site, do the best we can to follow it and maintain those regulations. There are record-keeping requirements for each establishment and facility, and so we're just verifying that our establishments are doing what they need to do.
Okay.
On that, I think if I could really quick, I think it's important to note that while the bill was passing through, it was the interpretation of myself and everybody else, to include the director of the Department of Agriculture, Doug Miyamoto, that bill met the Federal Meat Inspection Act requirements. And it is still the position, the last I talked to Director Miyamoto, was that bill still meets those requirements. Now the USDA immediately came out once they saw what we had done and said, they sent basically a nasty gram and said, this violates the Federal Meat Inspection Act. Wyoming Department of Agriculture fired back and said, we actually think it meets the Federal Meat Inspection Act. And now I'll put it a different way than Justin did. Now we're seeing a federal regulatory agency essentially weaponize an inspection process to punish a state that stepped out of line. The unfortunate part for the USDA in this regard is I haven't been sitting on my butt since they decided they were going to make threats and promises and these types of things. We're looking at right around 9 states at a minimum that'll be running this bill this next legislative session. So their problem is growing. Now, granted, that's not going to prevent them from coming out and being a real pain for Justin and Stephanie and essentially wasting Wyoming taxpayer dollars, which is damn unfortunate. But what is important to note is we've got somebody that's going to DC to get sworn in on January 5th that is pretty ornery about all of this action. I've had the opportunity to talk to her, and she will be having that conference call with the USDA in regards to utilizing their regulatory reach as essentially a weapon, is my opinion.
So let me just kind of frame this for the group. When I think about the things that are important to the folks in this coalition and the coalition's mission, if it's about the thriving local economies and the thriving sustainable agricultural lands, and then also access to food, this is an interesting case where there's some fragileness, right? Where we think, this gives us more access. This is a creative, innovative solution. And hopefully it doesn't bite us in the butt, right? That it actually makes things worse as an unintended consequence, right? So it's one that's worth thinking about if ultimately our goal is better access to healthy foods and the income that comes with that for our agricultural producers. It's worth kind of just taking that step back and thinking, oh, what's the best way to that end? Knowing that there's a lot that can be done in terms of advocacy and elected officials and all of that, but also a lot of this is out of our hands, right? Justin may have whatever beliefs, and the federal intervention is going to be what it is. So let's just kind of keep that in mind of our end goal is the same, but how do we do that in a way that's protecting consumers and also allowing our producers to do their good work? Let's jump into just kind of clarifying with this looming, oh gosh, in the background, and our sympathies for the folks at WDA and our well wishes for weathering the storm. Let's just back up a little bit and say, all right, separate of the herd share amendment, let's understand meat processing and regulations around that. I had started us with meat versus poultry. I don't know if that's the best place to start, but I'm thinking about that as the divide between potentially hazardous and non-potentially hazardous. Can we get some clarification on how these things are maybe regulated differently that people may or may not understand?
Yes, 9 CFR actually has a list of exemptions, and it's both under, what we would consider the domestic, the beef, the swine slaughter and all that. And then there's the poultry, and it's a completely separate section in the Code of Federal Regulations, and the exemptions for that are different. So as Tyler mentioned previously, the 1,000 bird exemption, which we're able to utilize under the Food Freedom Act, is one of the exemptions in the poultry side of that. There is a multitude of exemptions listed there on the, basically, and it's outlined by the number of birds and then who does the processing, whether or not those birds can be sold or purchased, and whether or not they have to be raised. So there's those exemptions, and then under the beef or the domestic portion under 303.1, there's a list of exemptions that are outlined there. And that's where all your custom producers are operating under. There's also, some caveats in there. There's what we call HRI, or hotels, restaurants, and institutions, and where that product can come from, and if a custom producer can sell that, and then having a retail counter. And so both of those sets of exemptions that I'm speaking of, FSIS has created a really good document that outlines those exemptions and is a down and dirty guideline, and just says, here's what you can do if you're operating under these exemptions. If you're not operating under those exemptions, you're either going to be a state or a federal plant.
Okay, so the distinction is either you fit under the exemptions, and we can talk about more specifically what those are, or not. And if not, then you have to be processing in the state or federally inspected facilities. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then can you, did you say you have, there's like a simple handout or document that explains those exemptions?
There is a simple document, and each one of those is outlined by FSIS. And so there's one that's named FSIS Guideline for Determining Whether a Livestock Slaughter or Processing Firm is Exempt from Inspection Requirements of the Federal Meat Inspection Act. So that's going to be for the domestic side, and then there's one for poultry as well.
Okay. What are the types of things that, just to give us an idea, that would, what are some common exemptions? Obviously herd share is probably one of them, but that allows people to process and sell meat separate from the USDA or state inspected processing.
Okay, so there's going to be 9 exemptions that are listed for the domestic side of things. And that is going to be your custom operation, or where the herd share is pulling that from. And that is processing to where that product is intended to go back to the original owner of that product. So you're really looking at who's receiving that product and the number of people receiving that product. And they're saying that such a small amount of people are receiving that product that traceability is easy, and therefore that product doesn't need to be under state or federal inspection. So that's one of the main exemptions in there. There's also an exemption in there that outlines if I want to slaughter or process my own animals for my own personal consumption on my home farm or ranch, I have that ability as long as I raise that animal and that animal is mine. There's some other exemptions in there that are outlined. I briefly touched on HRI. So if I have a retail counter and I'm running a meat shop, I can then sell to hotels, restaurants, and institutions 25% or roughly $75,700. And that's a number that changes on an annual basis. An amount of raw product. That product actually has to start with federally or state inspected product to begin with. So if I want to bring in box meat as a custom processor, let's say a strip loin and cut New York strips out of it and then wrap that package up, I can then sell that out of my retail counter or a percentage of that to hotel, restaurants, and institutions.
So help me clarify on that one. It sounds like if you have a retail counter, are they assuming that you're starting with, that this is custom processing, or that you're starting with a USDA or state inspected product?
Has to start with a state inspected or a federally inspected product to begin with.
Okay. So you might do like additional processing of making cuts further, but the initial processing was at an inspected facility.
Yeah, so the example I gave, if you run in a whole strip loin and then you slice it up into individual steaks at a certain thickness per your customer's desire, whatever that looks like, that loin itself would have to be state or federally inspected to start off with that.
Okay. Okay. Any other exemptions you want to call out that are commonly used? I've got the herd share, slaughtering your own animals, the HRI piece.
I would say that is probably the most common ones that we see and probably covers it.
And Justin, could you help connect us with that document just so we can make sure everybody can lay eyes on it directly? Give us some extra audience to it. So poultry then has its own exemptions. Poultry is classified just differently, but then it has its own list of exemptions based on the number of birds, who's doing the processing, et cetera. Do you want to clarify any of those nuances with poultry?
They get really technical when it talks about, here's a 1,000 bird exemption, this is where you can do that. If you get into the 20,000 bird exemption, you can't share processing centers, you can't purchase birds, then there's custom processing for poultry. So it really is complex when it comes to the poultry side. And to be honest, at this time, even though poultry inspection is allowed in the state of Wyoming, we don't have anybody that's currently doing it under inspection.
Okay. Are there places that are doing custom processing for poultry?
We don't have anyone that's licensed with us that's doing custom processing or anything in the state at this time.
Okay. Is it just too cold here for poultry? Is that what it comes down to? They freeze their little combs off?
Honestly, I think a lot of people are utilizing that 1,000 bird exemption. I think it gives people a lot of latitude. It's a large number of birds, and when you're looking at what you want to grow on your property and once you have time and the ability to grow and process, most people I talk to, it fits for them.
Yeah. All right. So we got the meat versus poultry. We got the herd share piece. Can we talk about the difficulties? We've got the different types of inspection that we went over, the custom, state, and federal. And we know that the state is kind of operating with the kind of delegated authority of the feds. The feds want to make sure that the state inspection is good. Can you speak to kind of that approval process? I've heard a lot, there just aren't many approved facilities in the state. Can you speak a little bit to that piece, Justin, or Stephanie, or whoever else?
Yeah, so if you want to be a custom facility or a state inspected facility or a federally inspected facility, the facility requirements for those facilities is almost exactly the same, minus a head wash station and a presentation if you're doing the inspection portion. The reason why is per 9 CFR, you have to meet sanitary requirements, and part of that is ensuring that the facility meets those requirements. That's why you'll see a lot more custom processors in the state, is because the record keeping for that is a lot less. We talked previously about that product is intended to go back to the owner of that animal, so traceability is a little bit easier, and the record keeping is less for a custom facility. State inspected facilities and federally inspected facilities, they have to have what's called a HACCP plan. You have to be HACCP certified to create that plan or make adjustments to that plan. They're extremely complex, they're extremely long. You have to look at the hazards and identify those and create an analysis based on what the facility is actually doing. And I think that is where people most commonly get a little bit scared of that process, or maybe don't have a good understanding. So if you're interested in opening a custom or state facility in the state of Wyoming, what we do is we send you out a plan review packet where you tell us what your intentions are, what you want to do. If you're just considering a custom shop that's going to do raw not ground and raw ground products, that process is fairly straightforward and fairly simple. But once you started getting into cooked product, dealing with nitrites, nitrates, and restricted ingredients, it becomes a little bit more challenging, and you have to look at the flow of food because you're still held accountable to the sanitary requirements.
So let me pause you right there, because I want to make sure I'm capturing it all. It sounds like the reporting requirements or the record keeping for custom inspection is less burdensome because it's pretty easy to track the product moving through, whereas for a state and federal inspection, you've got to have this more complex plan, and that itself is difficult to navigate. Help me clarify, if you're wanting to do, were you speaking to custom processing? If you want to do, depending on the types of products you want to sell, is that what you were, is that kind of more difficult layer still possible within the custom inspection or the custom processing facilities?
Yes, so you could still do the cooked product and all of that, nitrites, nitrates, and like your hams and bacons are going to have those kind of products in them. You can still do that under custom inspection because that product is still that owner's ham, and it's still going back to that owner of that ham, so the traceability is still pretty easy. Now, when you're starting to deal with the state or the federal, they have to develop an entire plan based on, how much nitrates or nitrates I'm adding to this thing. Did I consider listeria? Is this a fully cooked shelf-stable product? Is it not fully cooked? And that's where it gets really complex. So custom processing tends to be a little bit easier. Something else that I think is really great in Wyoming that we have that I really like to advocate for is, if you have an animal and you take that animal to a state or a federal plant and you have it slaughtered under inspection and you have that mark of inspection placed on that product, WDA will come out and inspect where you're storing that product, and it's free of charge to you. And it's part of that raw agricultural producer piece we were talking about when we were discussing vegetables and stuff like that. And you can sell that individual packet of meat, raw meat, because you're a raw agricultural producer. It can't be like a bacon or a ham. You can sell that raw product, that final end consumer, per the package. And that is something that's been allowed for a very long time.
Can you do that still? I appreciate you highlighting this opportunity. Can you do that if say you have something slaughtered at one of these inspected facilities, but it comes home in big parts? Could you do additional processing of chopping it up further, or does it need to be kind of in its final product when it leaves the inspected facility?
It needs to be in its final packaging, because if you're cutting or chopping or processing it, you cannot prove that that's done in a sanitary manner. So therefore, it needs to be, if it's a hamburger and you want a 1 pound Chubs, and it's in its final retail package with that mark of inspection. Once you open that package, you're removing that mark of inspection, and you can no longer sell it.
Okay, so same kind of thing. The head of lettuce as it is fine, but once you start messing with it more, then it puts it into a different category then.
Right, and so we have a lot of people that do that. We have a lot of agricultural producers in the state that are doing that type of, we come out and we look at your freezer, we verify that it's holding temp and you're not storing anything else in there with that product that can contaminate it, and then you can sell your individual packages. And I think that's a phenomenal program that probably not too many people know about.
And when we think about these state and federally inspected facilities, I feel like when I first moved to Wyoming, there was some talk of like there were none in certain areas. I was probably not understanding right. But do we know, I think it is a finite number though of USDA and state approved facilities. Do we have a sense of where those are? Can we list them off pretty easily?
I can get close. There's 9 state inspected facilities around the state. You know, we have one in Buffalo that's a state inspected facility. We've got one in Powell that's a state inspected facility. We've got one in Hyattville that's state inspected. Glen Rock's got one. Casper has one. Sheridan has a processing facility that does sausage. UW is a state inspected facility for us, and they offer meat sales as well. Any ones I missed, Stephanie?
Okay, did you mention Bichetto's? Did I miss that?
I did not mention Bichetto's. So
down in Rock Springs, it does both retail exempt product and then sausages. Couple Buffalo or one Buffalo plant.
And then we have Hudson as well. That's a state inspected facility.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and there, I believe last number I looked was somewhere around 7 federally inspected facilities. And some of those numbers are a little skewed. So when I talked about the state facilities, I told you they only do processing. So just because they're state facility may not mean that they do slaughter at that facility. And we have more facilities that do processing than we do that offer slaughter and processing. And that's going to be the same with the number of federal plants that I listed. We've got a group up in Jackson Hole that has a centralized kitchen, and they produce some products. My understanding is they're just processing. And then we have a jerky facility that is federally inspected. So they're considered a federal plant, but they only produce one product.
Okay, so some of that limitation when people talk about there's just not enough places to take them, some of it might be there's places for processing, but not necessarily for the slaughtering piece.
Slaughter and processing. And then, so Jackson Hole has a slaughter facility. There's one in Cody that I'm aware of. Torrington just opened one up. There's one we're anticipating opening in Sheridan. Of course, we've got the one in Laramie. Off the top of my head, those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay.
Star Valley has one. I forgot. And Thane, I think that is Thane or Afton. I can't remember which it is.
I think it's Thane.
Thane, T-H-A-N-E?
I believe so.
FSIS has it on their website. You can just Google federally inspected plants, and there's a spreadsheet. You can type in WY, and they all come up in the state, and they'll show you where they're at and what they do.
Okay.
So it's really
And similar to what we discussed earlier with the manufactured food program, we are willing to let you know where the state inspected meat plants are. All you need to do is contact the WDA and we can give you that information.
Okay. And it's nice that you guys know the details. I mean, not surprisingly, but you know the details if it's slaughter or just processing, or if it's processing, if it's only a sliver of the processing or a certain products or something like that. Good. I'm thinking we have some information here in terms of understanding the distinctions. We understand the complications of why it might be really difficult to get licensed under the state and federal guidelines. I wonder, Jack or Kelsey, if you want to chime in just on kind of the producer processor side. What other things do you think folks ought to know, whether they are consumers or fellow producers? What else would people benefit from understanding?
Kelsey, I don't want to step on your toes, but I will. So I do want to add one thing to what Tyler did. And boy, I appreciate everybody being here. But when you've got somebody here that wrote the doggone thing, that's pretty cool. What I would like to add to what he said was that it not only this new system that we're building, and we are building a new system, makes good meat, safe meat, more accessible to anybody. The other part of that, though, is that it makes that market, that dollar added market, more accessible to the rancher. And I think that's a huge part of this. We've got a state that's not a traditionally a fed cattle state. We are a cow country, but now just in the last decade, we've been able to market our own cattle, however they're produced. We don't produce them in big bunches. We don't have huge feedlots, but the profit margin on those cattle right now is phenomenal. A lot of times right now, a fed steer will return to the processor over $2,000. That's a lot more than than that producer is receiving. So what we want to do is make a path available to that producer where he can process or have processed and market his own cattle and recoup a lot of that money. So that's what that's coming about. What's happened is in the last 2 years, a market's developed, and it's a big market. And it's a market where people want to know where their meat comes from. They want to know that story. It's not so much maybe how it's produced, it's who produced it and how they did it. And that's getting very, very big. So what we're doing at CWC is, and we have anticipated this market and realized we're going to need a lot more butchers. And to your question, Carrie, that's what's happening right now is especially after COVID, that lit the fuse on this rocket. And a lot of people, because of the shortages, empty shelves, got worried. They went out, they found producers, they bought directly off the producer, however that happened, and they liked the product, and they're coming back and they're telling their neighbors. And I think this is going to get huge down the road to where that rancher is able to bypass the packer, maybe sell his own meat, and maybe process some of his own meat and recoup that money that would go somewhere else. That money stays in the state. So that's what CWC is doing right now. We realize that there's not near enough processing plants. In fact, when the Holcomb plant, if everybody remembers that, Tyson had a plant in Holcomb, Kansas that burnt down the year 16, 18 months ago. Didn't burn down, had a little fire, and they cut it down. That one plant kills 5,000 head or 6,000 head of cattle a day, 30,000 head of cattle a month. Okay, just think about that. 30,000 cattle a week. I'm sorry, 30,000 cattle a week is what that one plant was processing. It had a fire. I made kind of a statement then, kind of tongue in cheek, and I said, well, rather than rebuilding that one plant, let's build 1,000 plants. Let's build them all over the Rocky Mountains that do 30 head a week. What would that do? Well, COVID really brought that to the forefront. We can do that now. A lot of people are looking at putting these little plants in. And when I talk little plants, what the USDA, what WDA talks about a little plant, they're talking 200, 300, 400 head a day. And I'm talking what we're doing now, 50, 40, 50, 60 head. If Kelsey was here, I wish he was. I kind of think that's where he's at. He's considered a very small plant. I think he's a wonderful asset to any community in a wonderful way. Go ahead.
So let me chime in on that. I wanted to see, and if Kelsey's not on right now, Jack, maybe you can speak more to this, is what Kelsey's operating under, is he a custom plant, or has he jumped through the hoops even on that small scale for state or federal inspection?
He did jump through the hoops. He went to USDA inspection, and Stephanie, correct me, I know you will, because I need it a lot of times, but so they're basically the same. We're in the process now of getting it for our training unit here in Riverton, and it's the same rules. USDA and the state are basically the same rules, and so Kelsey went with the USDA. Now, Stephanie, the thing I'd like to bring up and make sure, and Justin, you correct me if I'm wrong too, just because you have that designation doesn't mean those animals have to be killed under that designation, right? They can still be custom exempt at that plant.
So Kelsey is a federal plant, and you are absolutely right. Because our authority is delegated authority, we have to meet the exact same regulations, whether it's salmonella, whether it's humane handling, and even our custom plants have to meet all the guidelines for humane handling, treatment, and slaughter of animals. So you're correct on that. I'm not sure I answered the second part of that question. I think I missed it.
Is he able to kill custom exempt even though it is a USDA
Yes.
plant?
He is, and so that's really common in the state of Wyoming too. You'll have a custom processor that does wild game, custom slaughter. You'll have a state plant that does custom or state inspected both. Matter of fact, the way it works for us is we issue out the days or a grant of inspection for how many days that you're going to be slaughtering under state or processing under state inspection. And then that's how many days that we come out and are on site for that slaughter process. So for the slaughter process, whether it be federal or whether it be state, an inspector has to be there the entire duration. We're doing a post-mortem and an ante-mortem inspection of that animal to make sure that we're not introducing sick animals into the food chain or the system there. But we've got a couple of facilities. We may go out and do a state inspection, and they may slaughter one, or they one a year, or one a day, or 10 a day. So there really is a broad spectrum here, and there's every plant in Wyoming is considered a small facility on USDA standards.
Right, and that's well, what my point I'm trying to make is I think that's the way the industry might be going now, is to we're at very small plants just like this, and I love it. What better way is there to have food security than to know who grew it, who butchered it, where it comes from? If you know the people that are raising your food, if you know the people that are processing your food, that's the greatest food security you can have. And that we have the ability now for that rancher to do all these things. He can raise the livestock, he can process the livestock, and he can sell his own livestock, and all that money there will stay here in Wyoming.
So, Jack, I appreciate those comments. Justin, did you want to add something real quick on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So if a rancher is slaughtering his own animal and is meeting those exemptions in 9 CFR, that's for personal use and can't be sold, or donated. It's not made for commerce, and that's covered under the Food Freedom Act in Section 104.
Justin, can you clarify that for me? That would not qualify under the herd share if he sold herd shares?
He cannot process that, no, because he hasn't met the sanitary requirements.
Well,
If
no,
he's
I'm saying he could. I'm saying he builds a plant and does satisfy the sanitary requirements.
Sure, if he's a licensed facility and he's doing it under custom, then absolutely.
So could I expand on that a little bit, Carrie? That's what we're looking at CWC. We realized quite a while ago that we're going to need a lot of butchers. This beef is going to stick around for a long time. And if it does go to these small plants, we're going to need a lot of whole animal butchers out there. So several years ago, we started, and Stephanie had a big part in it, plans for a new animal science building that would include a meat processing curriculum. We're just that close to getting the doggone thing done, and COVID hit. So that kind of set us back on our heels. But to jumpstart this thing, we went out and purchased, using Wyoming Works grant money, a mobile slaughter unit and a refrigerated transport unit. And then we've got COVID funds, and we're just now finishing up a mobile processing unit. Okay. So we're going to have the whole thing. We'll be able to do this. There's a few places around the country that are doing it. We're using it as a teaching vehicles. We want to be able to train butchers, but also it's a proof of concept. Is it a viable way to do it on the very small scale like this? A lot of people say, no, you got to have these economies of scale. You got to be big enough to access that export market. You got to be big enough to be able to sell your offal. Well, maybe so, but if you can make $2,000 on a critter, by processing your own, maybe you don't have to recoup all those other money that the big guys get. So this is an experiment. We're gonna teach people how to be butchers, and at the same time, going to explore the viabilities of these small mobile plants.
Yeah, appreciate that. Hey, Jack, you're one of the people that I hate most to interrupt, but since we're not on cowboy time, I gotta scoot
I
us.
got a poem about that.
I know you do. I've heard it a few times, usually when I'm running behind in my meetings, man. So let me just see, because we've got about 10 minutes left in this session. I've been looking in the chat about questions. It seems like there's interest in the process of moving from custom to state or USDA certification. I know, Justin, you mentioned that WDA can kind of send you out a packet to help walk through that process, and I imagine you all are available for help. Is there any other quick guidance you can give to folks if that's something that they're wanting to move towards?
Our website's a great resource. We go over the basic requirements. There's some regulations listed in the Wyoming Food Safety Rule, labelings under Chapter 4. We do all of our incorporations under Chapter 14 and then 9 CFR, but really reaching out to your local inspector. Our goal in working with you and providing you those plan review packets is to really take a look at it and let you know before you start dumping money into laying a foundation out and pouring a pad, making sure, you know, all those drains and stuff are in the right place, so you don't have to redo that work, or you don't have to go back and then say, oh, I forgot to put this in. We'll look at those plans. We'll partner with you. We'll walk you through the process. We'll give you guidance documents. We'll give you forms so you can log for BSE and SRM removal, and we will really put you on the right track. So I would just encourage anybody that's interested in the meat plant, reach out to your local inspector, reach out to myself. We'll get you a packet. Happy to answer any questions. We've got a meat grant going on right now, and we're just really busy with a bunch of facilities that are trying to open up and trying to get their business started, and everybody's got to get that done by December 30th. So we're really on a rush in the deadline, and all of our inspectors are super busy trying to do consultations because we want to make sure that these individuals are meeting those deadlines for that grant, and everyone will apply.
Appreciate that. Hey, and I realized we skipped over this piece. If somebody has meat processed from a custom facility, this goes back to the direct producer consumer relationship, right? As far as where things can be sold. And if you want to sell through a third party, that's where it has to have, I just want to clarify that that's where it has to have the state or USDA inspection, like certification. Is that correct, Justin?
So if you look at custom product, it specifically says on that product that it's not for sale. So if you have an animal that's produced and you've had it processed at a custom facility and then you want to sell it to somebody, you cannot do that. That animal actually has to be sold, and ownership has to change while that animal's live. So if you're dealing with a beef, it's going to be a brand inspection. It's going to show the ownership of that animal. If you're dealing with a hog, you can bill a sale to go with that animal.
That's where you have to have purchased it before slaughter. You can't buy it after the fact, right?
Correct. And so sharing an animal, kind of like what Tyler mentioned, has been around a really long time. You can do a quarter, you can do an eighth. All the owners need to be on that brand inspection or that bill of sale. The processing facilities going to need to maintain that record so they can show ownership and who received that.
All right, good. There was another question. I don't know who it was popping that up, but go ahead.
So I just want to expand on what Justin said about what we provide to a new facility. I noticed in the chat box, there's quite a few different questions about HACCP training. So on a facility that is going either state or federally inspected, they are required to have one individual who is HACCP trained. The state does offer HACCP training for meat. So if a facility is interested in becoming state inspected, that would be something that we would offer and that we provide to the plants. And so I just kind of wanted to answer that question since I did see it pop up in the chat and expand on what Justin had said.
So the state offers training. If you have to have a HACCP trained person on staff to have a licensed facility, the state offers that training?
That's correct.
Do you know how often that happens?
It's on an as-needed basis.
Okay.
Sorry. Is everyone familiar what HACCP is? Maybe I breezed over that or didn't really touch on that. So HACCP means Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. It's a food safety system that was developed by Pillsbury with NASA to make sure that astronauts were safe in space. And so it's a whole process or a system-based approach to validate or verify, and it has critical control points. So those are easily referred to as kill steps, and monitoring to ensure that that final product as it comes out of that facility is a safe product. It's got testing involved in it. I mean, it's a multi-stage. So when I was speaking to people really get bogged down in that HACCP program, it is really an extensive process, and you've got to have scientific documentation to prove everything in your HACCP plan. And that's a major challenge to becoming state or federally inspected. There are people out there that will do it for you, but they charge a fair amount to do that. But there are consultants.
Carrie, if I can maybe just jump in on that as well, that's actually something that Dr. Bledsoe with the Food Coalition has extensive experience doing in his previous line of work. And I know that's something that he's working on looking to set up with, I think, the University of Wyoming, some other educational facilities. But that's one of the resources we're looking to try and launch in the future as the Food Coalition is those training programs to help people put those plans together. That would be hopefully much less expensive if charged at all than some of these other resources Justin's mentioning. So I just wanted to put in a plug for us. That's something we're developing as well.
Great. So recognizing that this HACCP thing, there's specific training with it, but then there's the entire development of the plan, and thinking that individuals will still need to go through that training, but that the plan development, if there's some, I would say like blueprints, but if there's some pieces that can be shared more broadly with people, that would maybe get them over a hurdle that would be expensive otherwise. Am I understanding that right, Adam? Yeah.
Yes.
Ish.
And the department as well, we've developed a packet that we offer people, and then we just give it to them. And if they answer the questions, it'll kind of walk them through the process as a step-by-step to assist them with development of that HACCP plan. And then we're also willing to consult and help anybody.
Awesome. So just a little bit more time on this process. I'm going to ask people to put any of the problem spotting of where stuff is still not working out well in the chat. But while we've got our experts on the line, are there any other questions that we want to clarify live? I don't know if Adam and Leanne, if you've been tracking ones we haven't touched on yet, or if there's anything new that we want to ask before we run out of time.
Yes, I've been trying to keep a list of everyone's questions, so I hope I don't miss any. Tyler, at one point you had mentioned that there were about 9 other states looking to roll out a similar herd share amendment. Do you know off the top of your head which 9 those are?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I could tell you one that I know is publicly going about it. The reason why they wouldn't necessarily want to be that open about it and might want to drop it as kind of a surprise is because as we've already heard from the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, is that USDA is not necessarily that friendly about this. But I know that Texas is being very open about pursuing it. That's about all I'm allowed to say.
Oh, politics. Good to have people with such high self-control in your positions.
I would argue that the Wyoming Department of Agriculture probably thinks they wish Tyler had more self-control in regards to some of these things.
Well, appreciate your your careful candor with that. Other questions? We've just got a few more minutes. Adam, anything else that rises to the top of questions?
Yes, and at least one of these I think probably can go under problem spotting, so I'll save that. But one was, how many mobile processing units do we currently have in Wyoming, and do those units qualify as state or federal levels of inspection?
Wyoming, we currently don't have any licensed mobile solder units.
In fact, Justin, I think there's 12 all in the out of the Denver district, which would be the whole Western United States NOI. So I think there's not very many.
I'm unsure on the number, Jack. I don't know.
And so that's in this whole big region, there's 12 approved mobile processing units. Jack, are you guys hoping to get the CWC unit USDA approved?
Yes, ma'am. And that was because of the conversation we had with the secretary, who said that, you know, it's all the same rule book. You might as well go with, his answer was, if the USDA doesn't like it, we don't like it.
Yeah.
So we might as well get USDA.
Yep. And it'll be currently in process. Thanks, Melissa. All right, so that's a question on the mobile. One more question, Adam. Anything else that seems?
So this one I think can maybe just go on our problem spotting list, and I've got it written down, but someone pointed out that an issue that's come up is local processors get a higher margin on wild game during hunting season. So that kind of limits access for ranchers, and what's the solution to this? So that's probably a problem spotting thing. There was just a quick clarification that under herd share, if ownership is transitioned prior to slaughter, then the animal can be processed in a custom facility. They wanted to just confirm that. And that's all I've got.
So if an animal is purchased on the hoof or it's done prior to slaughter and all those owners are on that bill of sale, if it's not something that requires a brand inspection, then that animal can be processed in a custom facility. So there's a few provisions that are outlined in the Food Freedom Act, and I thought I was glancing over, there's a contract and some requirements listed in the Food Freedom Act that people need if they're doing an actual herd share.
If I could too, there, folks are constantly asking, I saw it as one of the questions, if there's a good contract out there. We didn't specifically detail what the contract has to look like as far as herd shares are concerned in the law, because ambiguity is mother's milk. Figure it out kind of deal. But there are some really good examples out there. Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund specifically targeted Wyoming's law and created a contract around it. I should note you can't get that contract unless you're a member of Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. But it is one of those deals where they crafted it and then passed it around some Wyoming attorneys to get the nod of approval from. But it is worthwhile. I'm a member of Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund myself. I think it's like $100 a year.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question real quick? If I live in Nebraska and buy a herd share from your herd, Tyler, can you send me the meat?
So under the Wyoming Food Freedom Act, no. Under the Federal Meat Inspection Act, as far as custom, or as far as you owning it before slaughter, yes, absolutely. As long as you're the owner before slaughter, there's no restriction under the Federal Meat Inspection Act in that regard. As long as you own it before it was slaughtered.
Thank you.
Is that, Justin, is that the way you see that?
It is, and that link that I provided that gave the list of exemptions, it's actually covered under that document. I believe it's under share, and then it talks about ownership of animals and the fact that an animal can be shared. If that's a half, if Tyler sells Jack half and the ownership transitions and it's a beef and he's got the brand inspection, yes.
Justin, I want you to say 1/1000th. Go ahead.
No, thank you.
1 pound of hamburger, please.
So it brings up a really good point, though. One of the challenges that I hear from the custom facilities and the facilities that I'm working with is, how do you have ownership of 20,000 people and maintain that ownership, and what does that look like? And that's some things that they're bringing up to WDA and asking us, well, what does that look like for me?
You want an easy answer on that one, Justin?
What's that?
You want an easy answer on that one? Well,
Sure.
Not so easy. I mean, the reality is your specialty is, without a doubt, agricultural law and regulation. I'm also the chairman of the Corporations Committee. LLCs have been spitting out millions of shares for years. And so if a producer were to have an entire herd of shares within an LLC, and those shares of that LLC were then sold, technically, and the brand belongs to that LLC, technically all you need is that LLC on that sale ticket, on that brand inspection, all of that, because that meets the requirements. Now, granted, if you wanted, as the WDA, if you wanted to find out who in that LLC owns that brand, you would have to call the Secretary of State and get a hold of that entity. Thankfully, we've been doing that for decades now, where there's multiple companies that own different brands and are able to do that. Now, granted, that's a livestock board, different entity than yourself, but just the same, I guess in my opinion, If I were going to do something like this, I'm not, but if I was going to do something like this, then that would be the way I would handle it, is through an LLC or through some type of corporation. And you're shedding liability at the same time. It's win-win-win.
Always creative innovations. So once again, I'd like to thank our panelists and the wisdom and precision and candor that they brought to the conversation today. If you'd like to put your videos on and show your applause. Really appreciate the time and your dedication to the work, and your willingness to share it with us today. Appreciate the links that came in through chat. And now we have faces to connect with, emails that I'm sure people will be pestering you. Hopefully not too relentlessly, but we really appreciate it. I would like to invite folks to identify problems now that we understand reality as defined and the big question mark of what the USDA is going to do with some of this with the herd shares. Love to invite folks to put where are problems, and I believe Adam's going to be collecting those out of the chat for me because he's been doing it, but please do those, and then let's go on break. Let's take 10 minutes. At 1:45 we'll come back and start talking about infrastructure and markets and differentiating your product, etc. We've got a presentation from Jesse, not sure if it's going to be live or in video, but we'll have that when we come back. So thank you again to our guests. We really appreciate it. You're welcome to stay as long as you like, but we know that you have a lot on your plate. So thank you, and just really appreciate your time. We'll see you all back at 1:45.
Thank you.
Leanne, do you want to just double check that, are we doing video? I'm assuming Jesse's at the hospital. Okay. Let me make you might need to be a co-host. Leanne, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Can I just hit the share screen at the bottom? Will that work?
I think so. So if you, as long as you have the video open in some window.
I do.
There you go.
And you should be on it now, I think. Are you seeing it?
Yep. Go ahead and hit play, and let's just make sure that the audio is playing, because sometimes you have to check a box to make sure that the audio comes with it.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say I'm looking for the boxes, but let me try to play it right now.
Let's see if it's working now. Yeah.
Miller, thanks for joining this lecture. I wanted to give an overview.
Cool.
Okay.
So just back it up to the start again, and when folks come back, I'm going to stop your share just in case someone's signing on now.
Okay. Do you have access to it now?
Yeah, I don't have access to your video, so when we come back, you'll have to screen share again, just like you did before. But that works.
Oh, I lost it all.
Oh, you lost it all? It's there.
Oh, it went somewhere. Oh, okay.
It's just behind in a window.
Okay. Whew.
You're good.
I know, I'm so nervous about it.
We'll talk you through it, and I feel like there is so much grace in the world right now for everybody navigating the technical things that you'll be just fine. I'm sure it's in there in a window. So when we come back from break, I'll tee it up and let everybody know what we're doing. But you can just share your screen once we're ready to start. Just share your screen again.
Mary, the time says 1:30 right now. Do you mean to change that to 1:45?
It should be 1:45. Thank you. Appreciate that attention to detail. Looking down at my agenda and looking at the wrong time. Thank you. All right. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Adam, are you collecting the problem spotting?
Yes, although I don't think I saw any others come through. So I was just keeping all of those questions in a Google document, and I just shared that with you.
Okay.
So
I'm just
tracked all. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for kind of preparing the agenda tomorrow, this is where I just kind of have question marks of what our workshop time will look like. So if we don't have big problems, we can just say, or if we don't have specific topics to work on, we can just open it up to say what else would be useful. How else could we use this time around this topic? And whether it's talking about folks who have gone through the process for certification, or who knows, maybe they'll just want to talk about best practices for vaccinations. I don't know. I have no idea what they're going to want to talk about. But if there's not major, like now that we've had this clarification, if there's not big, clear areas where they want to suggest revisions, we can just leave it more open-ended, and I'll try to wrangle creatively from there.
And I will mention one thing that didn't really get addressed, and we kind of ran out of time, and I was just going to put it in the box, but I had sent that question to you about the herd share and someone who processes on property, not through a custom or state inspected facility. You know, their question was, you know, is that just covered under the Food Freedom Act as opposed to, you know, actually having to take one? And I know I visited with you a little more, and I thought that might be a problem spotting, Adam. So if you want to make that notation.
I thought that maybe not, but I thought that got addressed if I'm just like a rancher and I'm slaughtering and processing cattle on my own land, then it's just for me. I can't but they're selling it to other people because they have a herd share, but they're not taking that. They have a facility on site of their own, so to speak. Yeah.
They're not taking it to a facility.
But as long with the herd share, if they're processing it themselves, they would still have to be a custom facility, right?
Yeah, that's
the way I understood it too. So
yeah, that's what Justin said. And Justin, I don't know if you're wanting to weigh in, but I thought you gave a pretty solid answer on that.
I just got back. I kind of heard the discussion, but I didn't hear the whole thing, but I'd be happy to answer a question you might have.
Leanne, do you want to play out your scenarios and Justin can clarify?
So the scenario was this. I have beef that I'm going to sell, and I have someone who's bought a herd share, but I do the processing myself. And the question was, if I have this herd share, do I have to take it to a licensed facility to sell it to that herd share person? Can I just process it and sell it to them direct to consumer? Why do I have to sell it as a herd share is what the question was. So
the exemption is outlined in there because you're the owner of the animal. You're able to process your own animal, and basically whatever you do to your own food is what you do to your own food. I mean, if you roll it in sand or whatever, so that meat has to go back directly to you, and it's outlined very specific in 9 CFR, you know, owner of the animal, non-paying guest, etc. And it's listed in that exemption guide. So if you are doing part of a herd share, you're putting that meat into commerce, and you're no longer the owner of the animal that raised it. Therefore, you've got to meet sanitary requirements and have to be licensed as a custom processor.
I was pretty sure on that, but I wanted to clarify before I went back to these people and answered their questions. I wanted to have a pretty, you know, clear answer. So, and I think I do.
And that's where I felt like Jack was having some discussion about that. I thought that's where he was going when I was trying to add that clarification as the rancher, and then I can process it. And then he clarified, well, as a rancher, if I have a facility that's licensed, therefore the sanitation is confirmed, and therefore you can do it.
Right.
There's some additional sanitation in there, not just overall facility sanitation, but there's the BSE and SRM removal that we discussed, and that's that specified risk material, and where you're removing the spinal cord and some different things, especially on animals that are over 30. So.
Gotcha.
Justin, when you say over 30, is that 30 pounds?
30 months of age.
30 months. This is where I don't know it at all. I'm like, 30 years? That sounds like an old beef.
I forget sometimes and throw in some lingo.
That's okay. I work with such different groups that I'm always learning new acronyms and what numbers are important or whatever else. So I'll jump from a homeless shelter to the Forest Service in a day sometimes. And so that's a lot of acronyms. So now I know what 30 means in that context. All right.
Justin, I actually just have a hopefully quick question for you. And no one's asked me this. So this is more just my brain wandering, but I was wondering, thinking basically about agritourism and how, you know, sometimes we have folks who would literally pay to come work on a ranch. If someone, so say you have a beef producer and they've sold herd shares. It's before the animal's slaughtered. They've sold herd shares, and they wanted to do the processing themselves. And so they had some other people who had herd shares in this animal and actually came out to be part of the processing, since those folks were the owners. And then it is, they're doing what they want with their meat. If they were on site, so if it was like almost an agritourism or like hey, we're going to have a teaching day, I mean, would that still be okay? Or would that, if they're doing it on site, not in a custom exempt facility, basically?
And I'm not going to answer that question very intentionally,
Sure.
because that is something that is being looked at in one of the questions that was outlined. We did have drafted an original response to that because we have received that as a question. But unfortunately, according to the way USDA sees it is not in line with what's outlined as